Okay, so kind of at the very beginning of the book, you kind of give us a really nice sort of kind of synopsis of how kind of pre-scientific or historical kind of humans have begun to try and understand what's led us down these roads of kind of having these events, and they could blame things like the gods or spirits or luck or black cats, broken mirrors, walking under ladders, these sorts of things for kind of anti-good things, and then you've got good things as well. So could you kind of sketch, I guess, just for us a little bit around the sort of historical human nature of trying to comprehend these sort of improbable events?
Yeah, yeah. I think the historical development is fascinating. I guess the starting point is that humans like to understand causes so that they can influence things to get a beneficial outcome. Learning that the movements in the grass mean there's a tiger lurking there, so you can avoid it. In some cases, it's easy to relate causes to effect. You throw a rock at a window and the window breaks. You stay out in the sun too long and you get sunburn, this kind of thing. But chance, things which are not necessarily always connected, it's tougher to understand. When I flip a coin, sometimes it comes up head, sometimes it doesn't. So because of that, people came up with all sorts of explanations, in the mists of history. There may be superstitions like the black cats you mentioned, or supernatural like magic and witches, or paranormal like ESP and telepathy, or religions, a super being of some kind steering things. In all these cases, they're trying to find some underlying reason, cause for what has happened. And as you say, in chapter 2 of the book, I talk about those sorts of explanations. However, and here's the crunch, the bottom line, and this is really the core of the improbability principle, is that it's not necessary to invent those kinds of explanations. Chance, luck, extraordinary coincidences can be explained by the now well understood mathematics of probability. I say now well understood, but it took understanding sort of started to dawn in about the mid 17th century. So it's taken us like 300 or 400 years to get to where we are now. But you can explain those things now using this sort of mathematics. But I think it's very interesting because I think in some ways religion was responsible for our current understanding of chance. Earlier religions tended to be polytheistic. They had lots of gods. And you can think of examples of that: Sumerian gods, Egyptian gods, and so on, a whole sort of panoply of gods. And if there are several gods, you can explain chance because gods in those sorts of situations compete and disagree with each other. They fight with each other. So it's quite reasonable that the outcome for humans would be unknown. It would depend which god got the upper hand. But then there was a sort of gradual shift over history, which is still going on, of course, I suppose, to monotheism, the belief that there's one God, as in Christianity, Islam, and so on. That means that explanation, these gods fighting with each other, is no longer tenable as an explanation for how sometimes this happens, sometimes that happens. Then the only possible explanation for uncertainty in the outcome is our ignorance, and attempts to conceptualize that ignorance in situations which go one way or the other is what really led to the development of our understanding of probability.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the next question kind of feeds into that as well a little bit. It's this idea that kind of we as humans, and you give some really great analogies or examples of this within the book, aren't able to act randomly. It's just not within our makeup, and this suggests that our grasp on probability is fairly poor. So I guess now we're kind of coming into the second decade of the 21st century. Kind of, how do we begin to try and compensate for this? How do we begin to try and overcome our poor grasp on something like improbability and the effect that that will have on our lives and those around us?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do have a poor intuitive grasp of chance, uncertainty, probability. I suppose one might have prefixed this particular point in discussion with a similar point about lack of numeracy, but that's probably for another story. But you're spot on. If you ask people to give you a list of random digits, they underestimate how often pairs of the same number occur by chance. They underestimate how often consecutive sequences of numbers come up by chance. They sort of overcompensate, if you like. We're not very good at behaving randomly or understanding chance. And I think one of the issues is that the uncertainty associated with randomness can be unsettling. We want to, coming back to one of the earlier questions, we want to feel in control of our lives, not subject to, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. We like to understand what causes this so that we can say, well, I don't want that to happen, so I won't do that, sort of thing. I think people underestimate, they don't recognize the extent to which their course through life is determined by chance events. I mean, if you think about it, one's genetic makeup, where we were born, what job opportunities opened just when you needed them, who you work with, and all sorts of things like that are things you can't control. They are just chance, which is influencing and affecting you. And what we have to do, of course, is basically, in card analogy, we have to play the hand we're dealt with in the best way we can, recognizing that we can't choose the hand we're dealt. There are other examples of our inability to understand or cope with chance. A classic one is which I rather like, is the gambler's fallacy. This says that I'll give you an example. Imagine tossing a coin, fair coin. We all know that if you toss a coin lots of times, it will come up roughly equal numbers of heads and tails. In fact, it's very unlikely to come up exactly equal numbers, but it's going to be roughly equal numbers. It's not going to depart very much from 50-50. So what the gambler's fallacy says, that if I'm tossing a fair coin and it comes up 10 heads in a row, it's more likely to come up tails the next time, because, as we all know, in the end, it's going to be 50-50. But that's wrong. And there are two ways of looking at this. One is, well, obviously, as I say, I think in the book, perhaps, I've said elsewhere, while a coin has a head, it doesn't have a memory, it doesn't have a brain. So, whether it's going to come up heads or tails the next time is, again, just chance. The reason it ends up with roughly 50-50 is that those initial 10 heads, it's not that they get compensated for by an excess of tails, they get diluted away, so that the next 10 heads, the next 10 tosses are likely to be roughly 50-50 heads or tails. And you keep doing this a long enough time, and the initial 10 heads will have been washed away, diluted away, so that overall in a long series it will be about 50-50. The gambler's fallacy is where they say 10 heads in a row, more likely to be tails next, and put money on it, and good chance of losing the money. So you're absolutely right. Humans can't act randomly. We don't really understand it. The lack of ability to predict, to understand causes, makes us, I think, uneasy.
If you enjoyed this clip, then head on over to Locals to access the full conversation right now. Supporters can access the video version, and everyone can access the audio-only version of the conversation. I'll see you over there.